after the assassination of President McKinley. Roosevelt was the youngest president ever at age 42. Many people know he was a great leader, but lots of people know how much he influenced newspapers. He helped create his own legacy by getting newspapers to say good things about him and his policies. He had very close relationships with people in the press. My dad and I found some letters he wrote to L. Clark Davis, a Philadelphia newspaper editor, at UVA's Special Collections Library. We even think that one of the letters might have been unpublished. Theodore Roosevelt became a president at a time when newspapers were growing in circulation. Here is a drawing of the printing presses at the Philadelphia Public Ledger in the late 1800s. By 1903, printing presses got even bigger and faster. One historian described the growth of the New York World newspaper this way. Joseph Pulitzer owned the paper. In 1883, the newspaper had a daily circulation of 15,000. Within a year, it grew to 16,000. Within 2 years, it went up to 150,000. Within 3 years, it grew to 250,000. Theodore Roosevelt understood how important these newspapers were. According to one historian, Roosevelt saw reporters almost every day, either individually or in small groups. A favorite occasion was at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, when he was getting a shave. The newsman made a practice of standing around and asking questions. This room is the old presidential office where Roosevelt would have sat. The Oval Office didn't exist yet. But Theodore Roosevelt also worked with reporters and editors in other cities. The editor of the Public Ledger in Philadelphia, L. Clark Davis, wrote a letter saying his editorial agreed with the president on Cuba. Just a few weeks later, Theodore Roosevelt tried to set Clark onto the Board of Visitors at West Point. It seems like Theodore Roosevelt was rewarding the reporter for saying good things about him.
To the Secretary of War. I think it would be a very good thing to put L. Clark Davis of Philadelphia on the Board of Visitors to the Military Academy in place of Henry Watterson, if it could be done without too much disarrangement of geographical considerations. Theodore Roosevelt, April 28, 1902.
In October of 1902, L. Clark Davis' newspaper published an editorial saying that Theodore Roosevelt had handled a coal strike really well. Just a day later, Theodore Roosevelt wrote back this letter, which we found at the University of Virginia.
Dear Mr. Davis, I am in receipt of your note of the 17th, with enclosure. Who would not be gratified to have such things said of him as you have said of me in your editorial? I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Faithfully yours, Theodore Roosevelt, October 19, 1902.
But L. Clark Davis did not always publish things that Theodore Roosevelt liked. In June of 1903, the Public Ledger had an editorial that did not talk about the Postmaster General favorably. Postmaster General was named Payne, and he worked with Theodore Roosevelt. Payne was trying to investigate some scandals and stealing and bribes, but L. Clark Davis did not think Payne was doing a very good job. After the editorial came out, Theodore Roosevelt wrote to L. Clark Davis. He defended the Postmaster General.
Dear Mr. Davis, I deeply appreciate your unvarying kindness, but I would be false so a singularly sweet-tempered and upright man if I now failed to stand up for Mr. Payne. Assistant Secretary General Tyner was an old public servant with an honorable record. He had been in the Post Office Department since the time I was a child. Payne wished, if possible, to spare the man, with his record of past service, from the disgrace of actual dismissal, when all that could be shown against him was incompetency. It has proven to be a misplaced clemency, and yet I think it was a clemency to which you, my dear Mr. Davis, with your generosity of feeling, might well have inclined to show in the like place. Theodore Roosevelt, June 19, 1903.
Later in 1903, an Army officer, General Miles, retired from the Army. Miles had fought in the Civil War and in the West. To many, he was a hero. But General Miles and President Roosevelt did not like each other. President Roosevelt did not go to any retirement ceremony, and many people thought the War Department had kicked out General Miles and insulted him. The Public Ledger published an editorial saying that General Miles was an honorable man and deserved better treatment. Roosevelt wrote a private letter back to Davis, saying he thought Miles was not as great as a man as everybody thought he was.
In view of the recent editorial in the Ledger, I send you, for your own personal use, a copy of a letter Secretary Root has just sent me about General Miles. Secretary Root did not refer the case to me any more than he referred to any other retirement. It went in the usual course of business. In other words, exactly as it ought to go. To speak of Miles as loyal is to use a fairly comical, inappropriate word. He has, during the last 4 years, when head of the Army, been as disloyal to the President and to the Army, and therefore to the nation, as any man has ever been. The only ability he has shown has been in manufacturing intrigue for his political advancement. He personally asked me to go in with him as vice presidential candidate to help him beat McKinley for renomination. Theodore Roosevelt, August 20, 1903.
We think this letter might be unpublished. It does not appear anywhere online or in the Theodore Roosevelt Center at Dickinson State. This letter is also special because so much of it is handwritten. It shows that Theodore Roosevelt wrote so much of this letter himself. Theodore Roosevelt and L. Clark Davis wrote back and forth many times. L. Clark Davis must have liked having his newspaper read by the president. Theodore Roosevelt got a chance to persuade an important editor to say good things about his presidency. Here are 2 more examples of President Roosevelt writing to L. Clark Davis.
Thank you for your editorial. I feel just as you do about the Miller matter. All that has made me nervous at all is lest some showing should be made against Miller so very bad as to make it hard to keep him in, because I entirely agree with you that his removal would be certain to be misinterpreted. Theodore Roosevelt, September 25, 1903. I thank you for your letter and the editorials. If you could come down here, I shall get you to take lunch with me, and I can tell you more at length than I can put on paper the history of both the labor trouble and the Delaware business. Theodore Roosevelt, October 5, 1903.
Theodore Roosevelt wanted to be remembered in a positive way, so he tried to get newspapers to say good things about him by giving them information. His letters to L. Clark Davis are just one example. He always had reporters in the White House. He saw the press as a tool that could be used to influence the nation. The newspapers helped him lead the nation and also create the legacy he wanted.